Greetings and welcome to Gumbo the Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lindsay Gary. Gumbo the Podcast highlights Africa and its many manifestations from the perspective of African people globally. Focusing on history and culture, its purpose is to educate, empower, connect, and liberate the African diaspora. And on today's episode, we'll be discussing something extremely important, and that is African birthing practices. And our guests today will be sharing their knowledge of this topic and the work they're doing in the field. We're joined by three amazing guests, LaKendra Howard, Brittany Mayfield, and Olivia Patton. LaKendra Howard is a professional dancer who has a passion for supporting mothers and families in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. She believes in educating to empower and deliberately approaches birth work as a doula, honoring the cultural practices of the Southern Black traditions. She has received training from Sister Midwife Productions, Divine Birth Wisdom, National Black Doulas Association, Doulas of Discernment, and Shades of Blue Project, all Black women-owned organizations. She currently serves as an advisory committee member for the Galveston County Teen Parenting Coalition, a nonprofit organization created to educate and support teen parents. Which is awesome. Y'all are always great. We're next joined by Brittany, who is a mother to four and is a somatic womb healing guide, doula, and foliage fairy. Her work is centered around reclaiming and re-embodying yin energy, connecting to, creating, and birthing new realities through the magic of our cycles and psychic womb. She is passionate about the erotic as it serves as a creative energy that is reclaimed in our mothering, language, dance, love, and our work. Olivia Patton is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Africology at Temple University. Olivia currently serves as an editor for Imhotep Journal, and she served as a conference planning committee member for the student organization and a peer reviewer for Imhotep Journal. Olivia's research interests center on African women's epistemology, ultimately seeking to discover what the cultural knowledge base is for African women on the continent, as well as throughout the diaspora, and how it has manifested itself prior to and after colonization. Olivia is currently working on her dissertation titled Cultural Legacy of the Southern African American Midwife. I'm just so excited to have y'all on. Y'all are great. This is going to be phenomenal. And I know that y'all are going to share some amazing information to our audience and to each other. So let's start off by, we've heard bios, but what does that actually translate to in your practice in a little bit more information? So let's start with LaKendra. What is the Southern Black tradition of being a doula, and what is your work around that?
Hello. So the Southern Black tradition of being a doula focuses on reclaiming, reintroducing, and maintaining and continuing those traditions that were forgotten about. So certain practices that were done with and for the mother during pregnancy, certain practices that were done with and for the mother postpartum, for example, how we care for the mother, the type of foods that were given to her, the type of herbs that we use pre and postpartum, even small things that we still continue to this day. Like I remember we've talked about this before about keeping a piece of the umbilical cord.
Right.
So like things like that we just, some things that we still just do because it's just always been done, but we don't know why or where it came from.
That's powerful. And I know we're going to hear a little bit more from our other guests, but that's so powerful to think about the fact that we're still doing things, because it's, I always say when I talk about the various topics of this podcast that there's been a lot of rhetoric that we lost a lot, and there's so many things that we have in our bodies, in our ancestral memory that we still tap into, even if we may, not understand why or where it comes from or the original meanings of it. It doesn't mean that those things are lost. And it doesn't mean that they are maybe not being accessed or utilized, that they can't be reclaimed. So really appreciate you saying that. And then we'll go ahead and move on to Brittany. Tell us a little bit more about you as a midwife.
Practicing. I'm getting there, but I center my work primarily around postpartum care, especially after having my fourth baby just a year ago, and understanding that the postpartum care it can make or break your health. It's a time to really take care of yourself, nurture yourself, and not yourself, for others to come in. So I really centered around creating community and being a part of that community for the mothers.
That's beautiful, because it's so interesting, because a lot of times we hear about what the mother needs to do for the baby when she's pregnant, but not necessarily about, okay, the baby's here, we're taking care of the baby, but like, what about my body? And what about my mind and my spirit and all that? So, of course, appreciate that work and look forward to learning more about it. And so, soon to be Dr. Olivia Patton, tell us a little bit more about your research and what you're doing in that area.
So, as stated previously, my work deals with African women and their epistemology. How have they done things? How have they always done things? Specifically centered around birthing and childcare practices that were brought over with the forced migration to the United States and throughout the diaspora. What does that look like? As stated by LaKendra, what are these cultural manifestations that have been there, have always been there, and were kind of not necessarily forgotten about, but just were disregarded with the medicalization of childbirth. The cultural component was disregarded as not being essential, where we know that that's not always the case. Just looking into what can be done to preserve these cultural connections, cultural components, and to ensure that they're being carried out for generations to come.
Yeah, so powerful to have that perspective and that aspect, because like you mentioned, there has been and there continues to be an intentional effort to keep us away from our roots culturally, but also to kill us. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but for us to not survive. And a lot of that was perpetuated, or has been perpetuated through, unfortunately, our healthcare system, as well as other systems that we're a part of, or not even a part of, but are involved with to a certain extent, living in this type of society. So it's very important for us to talk about that systemic effort, but also how we can, again, reclaim and, re-access those knowledges, those embodied knowledges. So yeah, I'm very thankful that you all three are doing different work, but quite similar and overlapping, because we need you all on all fronts when it comes to African birthing practices and of course things that come after the birthing process, because we do understand Black women are fundamental to Black people. You can't have, Black women, you can't have anybody without Black women in our culture, right? So I want to talk about now a little bit more about what are some examples of African birthing practices, and how do these differentiate from perhaps others that other cultures have. And just to clarify for the listeners who probably are already aware of this, if you've heard previous episodes, the term African that I'm using is not necessarily referring solely to people who are on the continent. When I'm saying African, I'm also talking about those of us who are in the African diaspora. So I'm using that terminology. So just to be clear, we are talking about global Black folk. Okay, all of us. So what are, if maybe each person can give us one practice that you want to talk about, that would be awesome. And feel free to chime in.
I'll start. So, but I'll preface this with saying that when it comes to a cultural practice, it's more of an idiosyncrasy inside of our practice. These are global commonalities with birth that all cultures have, but this is something that I've seen and I feel is very specific for us when it comes to nesting. So nesting is like that period before the baby comes, and the mama's like, she know the baby about to come, she getting ready, she cleaning the house, all of this. one thing that we do is we get our hair done. We gotta get some braids, we gotta get twists, we put our hair up. So like that is very specific to us, so.
What do you think about, like, where does that come from? Like, I don't have any children yet, so I'm curious as to, what, for those of you who've sat with birth or have given birth, like where does that come from, that being a part of the nesting process?
It's just one last thing to think about. Because with my oldest daughter, I didn't do any of that. I had no knowledge, My hair was matted, okay? It was matted just on one side because I'm always laying on this one side. But with my other 3 children, I've always gotten my hair braided. Always, it's just one last thing. And then it makes you feel beautiful, after having a baby, your hair is still together, you can just pull it back, pull it up, have it down. It's a beauty ritual to me.
Yeah.
It just adds confidence.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely.
And it's like, if you don't feel good, how you gonna, of course the maternal energy is still there, but it's like, give you a little pep in your step, make you feel like I want to get up and do, that's just in life anyway, but like I want to get up and move forward with my day. Because if I look in the mirror and I'm like, and then obviously thinking about the impact that pregnancy and birthing can have on your, your mental state, just looking beautiful can uplift your spirits. Not gonna say it's gonna solve the things, but that definitely makes it. Fortunately for me, my hair is locked, so I think I'll be all right. Maybe get a little fresh retwist shortly before that time. Okay,
and the style.
Heavy braid, have it tied down. And Olivia, what do you think? What's one birthing practice that comes to mind when we talk about the African context?
Oh, for sure. I when I think of that context, the connection of the placenta or the navel string, how we choose once the baby is born, what we do with it. There's some of us who take it and we put it into a tea after the birth, and it becomes a restorative process as a way to restore the body after giving birth. We have the burial, the connection to making sure that it's buried close to the place where the birth occurred, to ensure that connection, that familial connection, remains, right? Just like with that practice, I think of that being very much African, to where we saw it not only on the African continent, but being transposed over here in the United States, throughout the Caribbean, those types of places where those methods are still being practiced to this day. Hearing from other women who've given birth that they choose to keep the placenta so that they can ensure that it's properly cared for, right? Yeah.
And that's probably one of my favorites. Olivia and I, we were in the same program at Temple, and I remember our first semester, one of our professors, Dr. Kimani Nahusi, who's been a guest on the episode we had on hair, actually, he was the first person who brought that up to me into our class. And I think Olivia was there when he said, how ancient Egypt, so we're talking about Kemet, thousands of years ago, right? One of the oldest civilizations in the world, right? Basically, thousands of years ago, ancient Egyptians in Africa referred to inner Africa, so the parts of Africa that were west and south of, present day Egypt. They referred to that as inner Africa, but also to, they referred to inner Africa as the land of their placenta land. And you can see that in the hieroglyphics. And so that signifies that if that is indeed their placenta land and that is indeed their origins, that's where they're coming from. So thinking about that also shows you that they buried their placentas. Like, this is where they left their placentas. This is their sacred ground. This is their ancestral homeland. And then fast forward to like my third year in my PhD or second year in my PhD program, actually, I was studying, one of the languages of my ancestors, Kouri-Vini or Louisiana Creole. And I remember our professor said, that the way in Creole we say, where are you from, is to say, where is your umbilical cord buried? And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I just had no idea because I didn't speak the language fluently. So to say that thousands of years from that ancient time and thousands of miles away, that people in South Louisiana are literally asking you where you're from by asking where you decided to bury your umbilical cord. Same idea as a placenta, right? That we understood that it was sacred. We understood that there's a connection that we wanted to maintain to the earth, to land, to family, to ancestors. And we still do that. I talked to somebody when I'm here in Louisiana now. I talked to somebody a few days ago, and he told me they buried the baby's placenta, so an umbilical cord, so by their house. So it's still something that's definitely being practiced.
Mhm.
And Brittany, Miss Mayfield,
Yes.
what's one thing that comes to your mind that you want to share as far as the practice?
My practice.
Like a birthing or even postpartum practice.
Meal prepping.
Mm.
I remember being maybe 10, 11, and one of my cousins, she was maybe 21, 22 around the time. I remember not all of them, but like her mom, my great grandmother, like the aunties getting together and like making food. And then I didn't know really what was going on because it really wasn't like taught to us or passed down to us. It was just something that was happening. But just remembering like, oh, this is why they were making soups, and I just know my grandmother, you better boil you some liver. You better boil you some, because boiling, I'm learning that the liver becomes stagnant when you're pregnant because it's holding all the blood you're not releasing when you're menstruating. So once you have your baby, like nourishing your liver is so important because you're going to lose so much blood. So they will boil liver, you would eat liver and all of those things. So I think that's another tradition, just like the practice is keeping up with like your nutrition,
And that's so important because I think I'm so glad you said that because that would have been the last thing that came to my mind. And I know earlier LaKendra mentioned herbs as well. And so like that is imperative, right? Like using food and things to nourish your body, to replenish, to restore. I remember at one point, I don't know if LaKendra remembers this, maybe about, I want to say in 2018 or 2019, I had like 6 friends pregnant at one time. And I learned a lot during that period. And just learning how a woman's ribs move and the organ shifts and just like things you have to make space for that baby in your body. And so you have to absolutely restore. That's a really good point that I think maybe is not talked about
and
outside of birthing circles enough.
keeping your feet covered, keeping your head like, don't walk around the house bare feet, things like that. Just want to keep your body warm. Yeah, that's another thing. Like, girl, you gotta cover the baby head, you gotta cover your head too, I just hear my grandmother telling me all these things, and I just had my last baby. She's like, y'all be out too much. Cover your head.
And see, now that you brought that up, Brittany, that goes back to getting your hair done because you can't wash it.
You cannot.
You can't wash your hair because you think pouring water on your hair, it gets you cold. You're supposed to stay warm.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you wash it with warm water, because it's still going to get cold after.
Yeah.
Or even not drinking cold fluids, right? Making sure that all the foods that you're eating are warm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
See, like I'm learning something. I'll be like taking notes. No, that's powerful. And of course, I know LaKendra mentioned earlier, there's certain things that, are like specifically African Black people do. And there are obviously things that, it's just women like around the world. But I think what's beautiful is to know that Black women had a hand in that wherever other women lie, because, I always say we were the first people to understand the world. For a long time, we were the only people in the world. So we have to understand a higher being. We have to understand fire, like the elements, nature, of course, giving birth. So we have had, probably out of all the people in the world, we've had the knowledge the longest. You know what I'm saying? We've had that. So the power of that reclamation, of acknowledging that we have it, is so, oh my God, it's so beautiful. I want to segue a little bit and just kind of name a couple of other things we didn't name that we can kind of popcorn out of, if you will. And I want to talk about doulas and midwives in a second. But when I'm thinking about other practices, I'm thinking about breastfeeding. Are there any other things that come to mind outside of those things, just to kind of name a few, not necessarily explaining them, but just for our audience to kind of, have those pinpoints?
Baby wearing comes to mind. Keeping the baby close. And even as they get older and you're more mobile and can do things around the house, keeping the baby close to you. And I also read that it was a practice in West Africa that was a form of like potty training. I'm just now learning that, keeping the babies wrapped, that they knew not to like expel any bodily fluids. That was interesting to me.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because I know I have another friend who's also a doula, and she didn't really do diapers with her baby. When the baby was really small, she did the cloth. That's another thing, using natural diapers, things like that, like the cloth diapers, because for a long time our communities moved away from that. But I remember, I'm like, that's a little bitty baby to not have a diaper. But she was saying that like in a lot of other cultures, people don't really use diapers like that. The baby is potty trained very, very early. They learn when to go and when not to go before they can really walk and talk even. So I was kind of blown away by it. I was like, how that work?
Yeah,
But
my great grandmother would say that her oldest son was potty trained by 6 months. And I grew up thinking that my great grandmother was like really insane because of what I was being indoctrinated with in school. So I was like, this lady is insane. But just as I'm getting older and learning more things and having life experience, I'm like, wow, she really taught us a lot. Like I never knew that. It's called something elimination or something like that. You just train your baby to like expel, and it's like a natural thing. Like they know, okay, I'm on the pot now, so I can go. It's so interesting how intelligent little babies are,
It's a lot of that stuff is instinctual, and obviously they absorb. They're like sponges, even before they can really move well and talk. And also, it made me think about what you said about the baby wearing, the benefits of just that, the baby being close, but also, I remember somebody saying, somebody from the African continent, we don't really burp our babies like that. Like we don't have to sit there and like always pat their back. Because I remember that was a thing growing up. I'm like, we beating the heck out that baby to make the baby burp, the baby tired, let the burp come when it's ready. But I remember, seeing that, getting fed a bottle and then burping the baby. And they were like, no, we don't have to do that, because when we wrap the baby, naturally the things move around and the baby is able to release on their own, in various ways. So
posture and everything. Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't think I saw one stroller in all my trips that I've been to Africa many times. I don't think I've ever seen a stroller. And I remember somebody saying, oh, well, that's because they can't afford it, which is so racist, first of all, to say that they can't afford a stroller. But I was like, no, it's like not culturally what they do. It's not about money. It's about they're wrapping the baby, not necessarily, putting them in the stroller. And LaKendra, were you going to say something?
Oh no, I was just agreeing with what you just said with the baby when she brought a baby wearing, you saying how they don't burp the babies. And Brittany already said about the posture of a baby when they're being born. That helps a lot. So yeah, I was just agreeing, like, yes.
A little
I'm
baby.
learning some stuff too. It's connecting some more dots about why we do certain things that we do.
Right. And just imagining like all the things that y'all mentioned before that we'll be learning as we continue to, dive into this. It's amazing. Our ancestors had very immense knowledge, and some of it we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg with uncovering the reasons behind or the reasons why. When that's the beautiful part of it too. And then also I want to talk about what is it to be a doula, and what is it to be a midwife? What do those things actually translate to? And I'll ask for the doula section, I'll ask LaKendra first, what is a doula?
Okay, so a doula is just the non-medical support side of a pregnancy and birth and postpartum. That's really it. I will say it is necessary because being in the United States and being that we've moved away from midwifery, even like the traditional way that we've done midwifery, because it is making a comeback. It's coming strong. It's coming strong. It's coming. And transition to hospital births, being in a hospital, we've got away from seeing birth and pregnancy as something more holistic. It's all medical, and it's more than just the medical side about your body and your anatomy and the physiology that's happening. It's also spiritual, mental, it's emotional, very, very emotional. And all those things are important. And also being properly informed on what is happening medically as well. Because let's be like doctors don't always have time or don't take the time a lot of times because they may not have the time to give you the fullness and the complete informed consent that you would need to make certain decisions concerning your birth. And then they have their own policies. So a doula is a person who supports the family in all those types of areas outside of the medical side. So no medical advice, no. Medical information, yes. Preparing your mind, like childbirth education or understanding that, yes. Things like that. Preparing yourself emotionally, preparing to understand what's going to happen postpartum, what to expect when you are in labor, yes. Helping you find your voice to talk to your medical provider and tell them, no, you don't want something, or I want something done this way, and this is why, blah, blah, blah. Yes.
Duly needed. The doula is duly needed. Seriously. And I do want to clarify, because I meant to say this before. I'm referring to birth doulas, right? Because we have different types of doulas. We have doulas that are focused on postpartum. We have doulas that help people who are transitioning into ancestorhood. We have all different types of doulas. So I do want to just clarify that because I didn't specify that initially. But thank you, Doula Howard. And now I want to ask, because we are going to get into a little bit more about Olivia's research. I do want to ask Olivia about, and all of you really, about what caused, about the attack on our practices and like the causes of some of us moving away from those things for certain time periods. So before we get into that, though, I want to ask Brittany about midwifery. What is it to be a midwife? How would one become a midwife? What does a midwife do?
So there are just like doulas, there are many types of midwives. You have your nurse midwives who work in hospitals closely with the doctors. You have your traditional midwives who may not have received like a very practical training. You have licensed professional midwives, spiritual midwives. There's so many. I'm going the licensed professional midwifery route. It's like being an OBGYN. You're able to do the medical things like check if the mother's dilating, which I don't recommend. Also, being able to administer different types of medications. It's just more technical, more medical, that I'm shying away from, though, once I began my midwifery journey. I really want to be more on the spiritual, embodied side of things. More so, still very much so in my doula work, but as a midwife.
Yeah. That's a nice blend to have that background. It's like getting a doctor that's been a nurse.
Yeah, I don't want to like have births on top of each other or anything like that. Like sometimes you can have a midwife, she'll have like 3 births a month or something like that. But I really want to like take my time with the mothers, because I'm learning from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective at the moment, and the focus on the body, the focus on the organs, the nutrition is so important. I did not know a lot of these things, and how, not even that I did not know. It's in us spiritually, we know it, we embody it, but to like learn it, like, okay, these are like the technical things. This is why this is important for certain organs and things. And then the life cycles, like a mother that's from 25 to 35 is a little bit more healthier than a mother having a baby after 35. Now I'm understanding why they're saying you're high risk after having a baby after 35, 36 years old, because your energy depletes around that time. Your organs aren't as strong, so I'm so ready, y'all.
Ready for you. And
it-
also, can you give us another example of one of the things you've learned regarding the type of nutrition that is recommended and how it impacts the body? Just one example. I know you have many.
calcium rich diet. That's so important. Calcium and protein. Calcium, like bone broth, dry fish, things of that nature, so that your organs are fully supported, so that you're not expelling blood everywhere, so that your bones are healthy, so that you're not losing teeth when you're nursing, because that's a thing.
Yes.
We're learning that you lose a tooth for every birth, and baby, I can attest to that. Okay. Like,
one of my cousins too.
yeah. So it's a calcium deficiency, so just, I'm there. That's midwifery for me. Is like nutrition based, health based, organ based for mothers.
So powerful. And on that note, since we have discussed, these practices and the work that y'all are doing, and so many other women in this arena, I want to ask Olivia a question about the kind of the history of it. How is it that many of our ancestors, and when I say ancestors, I'm not even talking about going back that far, because it could even be great-grandparents, things like that. So how did some of them lose access? I think that's the best term. I'm not gonna say they lost the things, but maybe lose access or maybe move away from certain practices. What kind of impositions were placed onto them because of slavery and colonization?
Well, right. So with this introduction of Western medicine into childbirthing, right? We had where this transition period where women were being told and advised that it's no longer safe to give birth at home, that the safest place you could be is in a hospital, right? That this is where we can watch out for you if anything goes wrong. We're here to assist you and prevent death, right, or mortality of both you and the infant. This was done with white male physicians coming into this space that was previously preoccupied by Black women, right? The Black women that for hundreds of years in this country were the ones solely providing care for these infants, both Black and white. They were the ones that had the knowledge for the most part of how to assist the mother and provide care once the baby was brought forth into the world. But then what we saw was that regulations were passed as we turned into the early 20th century to regulate how birth was done, how we were allowed to give birth, how it was, to say that, oh, now, well, you have to give birth. If you're not going to give birth in a hospital, there has to be a nurse present or a physician present. Whereas before, it could just be the birthing attendant present along with the mother. So yeah, there's various legislation that was passed, lots of anti-midwifery campaigns where there was this propaganda pushed out that, midwives, specifically Black midwives, being portrayed as dirty, unclean, unhygienic, and that they're dangerous or illiterate to what's going on. When again, they were the ones that were responsible for ensuring the safe delivery of the baby and care for the mother. So with the medicalization, what happened was that there was this intrusion where now the women do not have the say over what's being done for themselves. They're no longer able to advocate for themselves. So because now it's the doctor knows best, the nurse knows best, they're not listening to these mothers. So we actually experienced this decline in care specifically for Black women in the United States. I believe it's, according to the CDC, Black women in the US die at a rate of 3 to 4 times the rate of white women. Giving birth and or after, right? And we have to look into and question why this is. We know for a fact that there have been studies conducted to say that Black women, Black people, so-called, don't experience the same pain as their white counterparts,
yes, we do.
right?
Humans.
So there's these racial biases, and we have to question why these are present and how do we overcome them.
I'm so glad you gave, that context, and it makes me think about personal experiences just with going. I think I mentioned it previously, going to one of my doctors was out, went to a different doctor, long story short, it's a white lady, and she looked at me like I was dirty. Like, I mean, I was just I hadn't even undressed or anything like that, but it was like this sheer disgust in me being her, I guess, patient, because I wasn't her normal patient, and we know that that's racism. It was just like the way she handled me. I was like, I ain't never coming back, but there's so many things. And I also think about, what's that gynecologist who they call the father of gynecology?
Dr. Sims, Marion Sims, J. Marion Sims.
Who, basically worked on, not basically, he worked on,
he butchered
them. And they call him the butcher. Ooh, I felt that in my uterus. I feel somewhere in my gut. I felt that, like you're butchering Black women, testing things out without anesthesia, without their consent. They didn't even have the ability. Hi, baby. They didn't even have the ability, to give consent, to refuse that kind of thing. It's just cruel. And then you put that person as the father, and you put all these other women who've even been responsible for white babies' births, you put them down, right? And now I'm supposed to listen to the person that's considered, we're supposed to follow this whole field that was, quote unquote, pioneered by this racist terrorist. I mean, 'cause that's what he is. It doesn't add up. I'd rather listen to grandma now, personally. But there is this, this, again, this major effort to for one, get us into a system that we know is going to, like you were saying, Olivia, with the statistics, which is going to not support us, which is not going to do that all the time and a lot of time, rather than relying on what we already knew. It's scary to think about that. And that's why I believe a lot of our people are waking up, and there's that resurgence, which gives us hope, of people acknowledging these statistics, of acknowledging not only our traditions. I looked up at my ancestors when I said that. They just I felt them looking at me. I have photos of them in here. And the people that I'm looking at, they had 16 children. These are my great-grandparents. My grandpa was the last out of 16. But either way, just acknowledging those things. And also the fact that you are examples of how we can be a part of the change. We can be a part of getting us to where we need to be again, and making sure that these lies, misconceptions aren't continuously perpetuated in our community or about our community, by saying, hey, I'm going to be a doula. I'm going to research this as a PhD student. I'm going to be a midwife. That's so, so, so powerful. It really is. It really is. Did y'all have any thoughts on any challenges specifically that Black women, or not even thoughts, just any examples that you wanted to share of the racism Black women are susceptible to in the field? And this is not to say that we don't have good OB-GYNs, right? Because I have an OB-GYN and she's great. She's a Black woman. I feel like every time I go in there, it's a therapy session. And I know she's taking good care of me. So it's not to say that doesn't exist, right? And obviously Black women, we have that choice. We have options, which is what we didn't have before. So whichever way you decide to go, if it's a hospital birth, a home birth, or some hybrid of different practices, we have those options now, which is beautiful. But I do want to talk a little bit more about what are some of these other challenges that we particularly are faced with in maternal health. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Olivia a question. Is there anything about Black women being overly medicated going into the hospitals? Because I think about my birth with my daughter a lot. I was overly medicated because, I was young. I couldn't advocate for myself. I was hallucinating. I was so medicated, so that's something I want to know. Like, are they overly medicating us?
I haven't. That's interesting that you have mentioned that. I have not come across it yet in my research. But that is I just jotted it down to research that further, because that's something that definitely I could for sure see being the case. If not even being over medicated to the point where you're kind of out of your mind when you're being forced to make these decisions in the hospital, right? To maybe, having a cesarean where otherwise you might not have needed it because the doctor is trying to push you out as quickly as they can so they can move on to the next. So definitely a topic that I would be interested in researching further. Thank you.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, I had an IV going, I had Pitocin going, I had the thing in my back going. It was just a lot. It just seemed like too much,
It does. And it also it's interesting how these racist practices hit us on all fronts. Because then you also have the other thing where I forget who mentioned it earlier, the fact that they believe that we don't feel pain. Right. So I don't even think that them over medicating you is about, oh, you're feeling a lot of pain. I really can see that point Olivia is making about kind of drugging you, if you will, to prevent you from being able to have agency for yourself in those situations and advocating for yourself. But also the fact that they don't think we need certain things because we're supposed to be strong. And all people have some kind of strength, right? Mentally, psychologically, depending on what you're talking about, physically. But to think that we're supposed to just take pain is sick. And it goes back to that butcher, right? You're going to take this pain. There is no anesthesia for you, to go through this. This idea is really sick to think that we could even be, ignored when we're having issues, leading up to or during, after, not taken seriously, just not cared for, period. Were there any other challenges, LaKendra, that you wanted to share, throughout the entire process, the pregnancy, the birth, postpartum, that are uniquely challenging for Black women?
I didn't have anything like off the top of my head, but I will say, because future doctor,
Don't claim that.
Olivia, yes, doctoral candidate, that's the term.
Yeah.
Doctoral candidate,
Claiming
Olivia,
it.
yes, was bringing up about mortality as one of those reasons why there was a transition to the hospitals. I would say, just thinking about mortality now, and the fact that a lot of those maternal mortality deaths are postpartum, like after the baby is born, because nobody's paying attention, like, or listening to that mother when she feels something wrong in her body, So, and preeclampsia is an issue even postpartum,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So, yeah, and that even ties back to what Brittany was talking about, how that postpartum is so important, taking care of that body and that nutrition. When you're in that hospital, that day or two after, and nobody's really listening to you, that's where it happens.
Yeah, because you're depleted. You're depleted of everything, energy, blood, everything. So,
And the hospital, two things. First of all, medical doctors don't have many classes on nutrition. So a lot of them don't understand fully those connections, like, of nutrition, of course, if you're unique, you may have a better idea, but for them, it's just like, oh, like, eat healthy. But they don't understand the depth of, okay, eating certain things for certain things, right? Like more traditional practices have. So I think that's a huge issue, right? But then also, it's also thinking about the fact that the irony of it, right? You're telling us we need to be in the hospital, but a lot of these deaths are happening in the hospital.
Yeah.
That's what LaKendra was getting at. Like, that's supposed to prevent it,
but it's up.
but it's increasing because of those circumstances. So to me, that is attempted genocide. And I'm not saying everybody who's a part of that system is doing that, but the system itself, that is designed to prevent us from reproducing, or effectively, for that matter. So it's just a matter of us being well informed, continue to do the research, and really going with providers that have our best interests. And it's unfortunate that so many of us don't know. Because I remember I had another friend that was pregnant. She's like, I'm going to the hospital. I was like, well, just consider other options. So I'm hoping that more and more of us even just open our eyes to other options and other alternatives. Okay, so as we, continue to discuss, all the different challenges that Black women face, and when it comes to this area, what are some other things that you would like to share as a final word, or just something that you want the audience to be aware of, whether that's celebratory, whether that's just, informational, and we'll start off with Olivia.
So first, all I would like to say is that, there has been this permeation of death into childbirthing, especially for the Black woman, the African woman, fear of not having autonomy over your own body, and this whole experience and process that you're going through. So I would say, don't be afraid to really reach out, branch out, educate yourself as much as you can. Look into all the different avenues to really, truly make sure that you are choosing the best method for yourself, whatever that may be, whether it may be a hospital birth, the utilization of a doula, a midwife, or with a physician. You have that autonomy, and it is your right to decide what is right for you, and no one should be able to take that away from you. To ensure that your birthing is as stress-free, as beautiful as it can possibly be, because that's what it's all about, ensuring the safe delivery of your child and that you're there to see them grow up.
That's the word, that you're there to see them grow up. Wow. Powerful. Thank you so much, Olivia, for that. Soon to be Dr. Patton. And Brittany. Thank you. Brittany, did you have any final thoughts, words that you wanted to share?
Pregnancy and after pregnancy is a gift, and it's a time to listen to your body, to slow down, to really love on yourself, to receive love from others, because the health of the baby, of the family, is determined by the health of the mother. Even if you have to go back to work after 6 weeks, take that 6 weeks to live as slowly and restfully as possible. Because that month and a half, 2 months after having a baby is so critical to the generations moving forward. So it's okay to rest, mamas.
And if that ain't a word, I don't know what is. Thank you for that, Brittany. And last but not least, Miss LaKendra.
A lot has already been said. I think I know it is important to know and understand as much as you can that you can have agency over your body. So that's it. And in the words of Sister Midwife, birth is the revolution.
I felt that. I really felt that. Thank y'all so much. Thank you, LaKendra, for that final thought. All of you for your final thoughts, and just for everything that y'all are doing. As I said, this topic always gets me emotional. I'm usually emotional on these episodes, but this one in particular is so revolutionary. It's so powerful. It's so fundamental to how we got here and how our line and how we will continue in the world. And it's fundamental to our culture to not only practice our culture, but to sustain ourselves as people. So really appreciate y'all tremendously for that. And as we wrap up, I would love for you to share any events or activities you have coming up and how our listeners can connect with you all. So we'll start with LaKendra for that.
Connect with me on Instagram at Thela. THEE__LAAH. Also, supports the Galveston County Teen Pregnancy Coalition. Donates. We are opening up a parent support center here in Galveston County. GCTPC.org. And if you want a consultation, about anything concerning your pregnancy, postpartum, all consultations are free. You can hit me up to schedule a consultation at bit.ly/abundant birth.
Thank you. And Brittany.
Yes, I am on Instagram only at the moment at Yintellectual. It's intellectual with the Y in front of it, Yintellectual. I don't have any space for births this year. I am accepting clients who are ready to become pregnant, and also any mamas who feel that they did not receive proper postpartum care. It is not too late. It is never too late to reset and restore your body. And I'm also open for that work. And you can hit me up on Instagram via DM.
Yes, thank you, intellectual. And last but not least, soon to be Dr. Patton. How can we keep up with you and learn more about your work research?
So best way to contact me, I don't have any Instagram or anything specifically for my work, but the best way to reach me if you want to get in touch with me is my email. You can contact me via tuk96841@temple.edu. That's the best way to reach me. I plan to be at NCBS, our national conference this year. May or may not be presenting, so hopefully, depending on how quickly I can get my abstract in. But I will be in attendance this year. That is the plan. So if you want to reach out to me there, I'll be there as well in March.
In March. And what city is it in this year?
San Jose.
San Jose, that's right. Okay, I was going to say San Diego, but I was like, I know that's not right. Thank you so much for all of that. And for our listeners, thank you again for tuning in. And be sure to connect with Gumbo the Podcast. Our website is gumbothepodcast.com. Our Instagram is @gumbothepodcast. And of course, you can keep up with these amazing women through our website and social media platform. And I hope you enjoyed your bowl.
Done.